So in this module, we're going to be looking at creating something more of a jacking groove. I mean, so far what we have is we have a really super solid, chunky kick. We have a super solid, chunky straight loop and some awesome hats, and they're all kind of sitting together really nicely to form a very rigid kind of groove with the one bit of lightness being created by those loose hats. So the goal here is to create a kind of jacking groove where we'll find some space in between the sounds that we've created so far for this groove to kind of swing. Now, the idea of this loop is not at all that it's there to replicate the content of our straight loop. Instead, it's providing almost the antithesis to it. It's providing content that's missing from the straight loop. Now, this particular loop can be really full of character because this is what's going to kind of drive the flavor of the track. With loops like this, we want to be very kind of deliberate with any non-quantized shuffle that's going on, especially when we start layering up maybe one or two other loops to sit together. So when that happens, we need to get quite granular with our warp markers, have several parts open at once, and just make sure that our shuffles are kind of aligned with one another. There's also work we can do here with stereo to make sure that things are, broad and they're occupying the space that they should be. We can also experiment a little bit in this tutorial with some distortion and just see, again, if we can really add some character to the loops or loop that we're focusing on. Now, when I first got these loops together from Loop Cloud, this one particularly caught my eye, this top loop. And I've just dropped it here. I've got an instance of the complex channel strip here open, but I'm going to turn that off for now because there's no processing happening on it at this moment anyway. And the goal here really is just to listen to this loop and see how it works alongside what we have already. So I'll run round our straight loop with our claps and our kick and everything for 4 bars, and I'll drop in this new top loop that I'm thinking of using. Now, there's some elements that I really like about this. There's a little rhythm that's being suggested by it. And the rhythm for me is and there are these hi-hats that are happening up here. They are giving it a kind of shuffle, but that's not specifically the area that I'm interested in. I'm quite interested in more of the clanky nature of the percussion here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start losing one or two of these notes from this loop, and we're just going to minimize it slightly and do some work on making sure that the reverb tails or the decay time on each individual sample is pretty much where we want it to be. And to make that easier, I'm just going to run round a single bar and then do some experimentation here. So I think this is unnecessary, this little hat. I'm just going to work for a second on the volume envelope here. Now this hi-hat, I feel like it's the frequency on it is kind of clashing with what we already have in the main loop. And there's also quite a lot of bottom end on this loop, as you can see here. Let's get into the Nova again. And see how much bottom end there is going on in there. I don't really need... I do quite like the tone of this, like almost a tom. I don't think it's entirely necessary. There's a lot of top end information here, so we're actually going to put a low pass filter on here, or a high cut. It's really this kind of mid-range that I'm quite excited about with this sample. That's a very rough kind of starting point with that. Let's just see how it sits. I think we can get rid of that beat on the third down beat. And I think probably get rid of that hat there as well. So let's just check on the key of these as well. That's our G. And you can hear those little vocal samples that are in there somewhere, and I think that's on a D. It's actually slightly flat, so it almost sounds like it's at a quarter tone or something. So I'm just going to get in and put this into, this will probably change the pitch slightly anyway. Let's put it into complex pro mode. Yeah, and that's actually brought it into the right kind of pitch. So at least it's not in key, but it's a fifth above the root note, and that works fine. That's a very kind of concordant key arrangement to have here. A little click there at the beginning of that. Now that's working pretty well, but it's quite flat. It's quite kind of it's quite down the middle, really, the sound itself. Very, very, very much kind of mono sound. So I'm going to have a look for a Max for Live device that I think you get with 11 called Doubler. And we're going to drop that onto this channel. We'll stick it at the very start of our complex channel strip. So the way this works is you can select like multiple versions of the same sampler, and what it will do is it will spread them quite radically in the stereo field if you change the delay time. And what you're effectively doing there is you're delaying the point at which one of these sides actually appears. You can see that's created quite a seismic shift already. So if we then try, let's just experiment with this and see what happens if we say go to 15 here. We've gone up to 4 times doubling here, and the amp needs to be turned on effectively. Maybe we go with 5 here. That's a nasty kind of chorusy effect there. Whereas that's kind of nice, I'm liking that. Now, in order to sort of constrain this stereo effect, which is just really operating under its own volition at the moment, I'm going to put an instance of Ableton's utility, very handy little tool. And here we can just control that width a little bit. So we've got some stereo effect going on here, as you can see from, if we go into stereo mode on EQ8. And also another way of looking at it really is on span, which is a good way of looking at it. And actually here you can see what this doubler is doing. So it's pulling out some frequencies here around about 180, 170 hertz. So rather than wanting that, we don't want quite as much in that department. It feels slightly unnatural. So this is where EQ8 really comes into its own again. If we go up to say 170 hertz here, and then let's tighten up the band a little bit. Now let's widen the band out a touch. And you can see that what we've done here is we've just brought this little bit of rogue stereo information in, just reined it in a bit, and it's actually now starting to feel a little bit more natural. And here around about 285, let's put another notch in here at 285. And tighten up the band a little bit. And we've got another notch in there. And that's just got rid of that last sort of bit of erroneous stereo stuff. And then we're going to put in a low cut here. Again, just all in the stereo field. It's not affecting the kind of mono content at all. Now we're just going to lose a little bit of that kind of lower mid stereo information. And what's so interesting about this is what we've done here on the doubler is we've effectively delayed the right-hand side by 10 milliseconds. That's what this is telling us. And by doing that, it's made it feel in our heads like the sound has been panned over to the left. But you can see by the volume slider here that actually isn't the case. But what it's doing by having moved it slightly ahead of time, effectively on the left-hand side, is it's tricking our brain into thinking it's louder by it simply being the first thing that we hear. And this is actually a great technique that you can use on things like bass lines, for example. If you actually want a bass line to, and I'm not talking about the doubler, I'm simply talking about like bringing your bass forward slightly in time, maybe even 5 milliseconds before a kick drum happens, it will trick the brain into thinking that the bass is actually louder than it is. Now, in the case of this particular groove that we've got going on here, it's quite important that we listen to it with everything else that's happening so that we don't get too carried away in the processing. And that's actually sounding pretty good.